Greetings, everyone. It's so exciting to be here with you today to officially launch the new SEL Journal. The aims of this webinar is first to provide the vision and a description of this new journal, and also to provide answers to many of your frequently asked questions. So we will have time also at the end to have those questions answered as well, the ones that you come up with today. Your host for this webinar is me. I'm Dr. Kimberly Schonert-Reichel, or Kim, you can call me. I'm the editor-in-chief of the new journal entitled Social and Emotional Learning, Research, Practice, and Policy. It's a new journal published by the Elsevier Press. I'm also the Novo Foundation Endowed Chair in Social and Emotional Learning and a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Illinois at Chicago. A little bit more about myself. I actually am new back home to Chicago. I grew up here, but then moved to Vancouver, Canada, and was a professor in the Faculty of Education for 30 years at the University of British Columbia. And prior to that time, I was a middle school teacher and a high school teacher. So I bring both the research and the practice part of social and emotional learning. I've been a long time researcher of social emotional learning programs, practices, and focus on things like teacher well-being, as well as a bunch of other topics. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. And I'm going to also introduce my co-host, Dr. Vicki Shevchevsky, who's associate editor of the practice section for the journal. Take it away, Vicki.
Thanks so much, Kim, and hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you today, and many thanks to both Castle and to Kim for including me. So as Kim mentioned, I'm the Education Director at the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, and prior to Greater Good, I worked as both a classroom teacher and a school leader. So at Greater Good, my work centers on translating the science of empathy, compassion, emotions, awe, gratitude, purpose, happiness, mindfulness, ethical development, forgiveness, what we call the science of a meaningful life. We translate this science into practical ways that educators can use the science in their classroom with students for their own well-being and to also help school leaders build a positive school culture. So I write for our free online magazine, Greater Good, and I also write practices for our website, Greater Good in Education, that offers about 300 free research-based practices for education professionals. I also teach online courses and run some communities of practice for educators. And as the co-associate editor for practice of this journal, I, along with my colleague, Dr. Lisa Fluke, help researchers and practitioners share their incredibly important research and experience around SEL in practical ways that can help inform the work of other education professionals. So I'm really excited to be here today to share more about what we're looking for a little later for this section in the webinar. And I'll hand it back to you, Kim.
Great, thanks, Vicki. So now I'm going to go in and just tell you exactly what the journal is, how it was developed, and what kinds of research and papers we publish. So just to give you a little bit of background, the field of social and emotional learning really was launched with the science, the importance of understanding the research of that. And through the years, there have been a number of publications that really summarize this work. It started in 1997, was the first book promoting social and emotional learning. And that was a really important book for the field, published by ASCD, really saying, here's social and emotional learning has landed. Then in 2004, the next book that was published was called Building Academic Success on Social and Emotional Learning. What does the research say? And then finally, in 2015, there was the Handbook of Social and Emotional Learning that published a number of chapters on the science and practice of SEL. But what we realized, what was really needed for the field was a journal specifically devoted to social and emotional learning research, practice, and policy. So over a few years, a group of us, we called ourselves the Sprint team, got together, myself, Dr. Roger Weisberg, Dr. Mark Greenberg, Dr. Catherine Bradshaw, Dr. Dale Blythe, got together and met to try and figure out, could we get a publisher for a new journal? And we worked really hard to figure out what kind of journal would be unique in the field. And what we landed on was this new journal, just officially launched mid-July in 2022, published by Elsevier, called Social and Emotional Learning, Research, Practice, and Policy. And the vision for the journal is it's a new authoritative quarterly, so 4 times a year, online publication for the field of SEL. And this is just, you'll get the link to the website to go to the journal. And this is just where it is on Elsevier. And we'll be going through some of the the things that you need to know about the journal if you are interested in submitting or want to be able to read articles on it. So this new journal is novel in the field because it's still deliberately designed to attract and engage SEL research, practice, and policy through leaders in ways that both enhance the development of use of research on SEL impact and implementation, improve the ways that practice is shaped and supported, and provide empirical evidence and perspectives that inform policy discussions. What's really important to say is a journal it's an independent journal that's sponsored by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL, as you know, because you're here on this webinar. The journal is editorially independent, however, of CASEL and governed by an independent publications committee that is responsible for the journal's editorial policies and operations. So it's really important to keep in mind that although the journal is sponsored by CASEL, it is independent, and so it is not influenced by CASEL per se. It's really an independent research and practice journal. The aims and scope of the journal include it's a primary international destination. So we really encourage people from different countries all over the world to submit their articles on the research of the science, practice, and policy in the field of SEL. It's also peer-reviewed journal, which means that when people submit articles, it's sent out for review through peer review that is masked, which means that the person who is reviewing the article, we usually have 2 to 3 people review the article that do not know who the author is, and then the author also doesn't know who the reviewers are. So this is a way to really maintain peer-reviewed and scientific quality. So we're really interested in ways that enhance the development and use of research, both through things like SEL implementation and impact, improve the ways practice is shaped and supported, and provide empirical evidence and perspectives that inform practice and policy. And the journal will publish articles focused all the way from early childhood to post-secondary, as well as topics such as adult SEL with SEL program and practice that span multiple settings and contexts. So this is a journal that is not just thinking of research in schools per se, but across many different contexts, including school, home, community, out of school time, workplace, higher education. So we really want to encourage people to submit articles and to be for the field across many of those different disciplines. So we have 4 sections in the journal, and we'll kind of delve a bit deeper into these. And this was really something that is unique in the field of SEL, or in the field of academia, to tell you the truth. That was one of the things that we really had to work on. So there's 4 sections. The first section is a regional research, and in a little while, I'll tell you a bit more about that. The second section is critical perspectives on SEL research, programs, practice, and policy. And then Vicki will go into the section called SEL in practice, and we also have another section called SEL in policy. Now we have a wonderful leadership board for the journal that really helps run this. And I'll just go through who some of the people are. As I mentioned before, I'm editor-in-chief. The senior associate editor is Dr. Catherine Bradshaw from the University of Virginia. So we have 2 associate co-editors for each of those 4 sections. So for the SEL research practice and or policy evidence section, we have Clark McGowan from Rush University Medical Center and Mike Strambler from Yale School of Medicine. The associate co-editors for the critical perspectives on SEL research, programs, practice, and policy is Dr. Sarah Rim-Kaufman from University of Virginia and Jorge Getz from University de los Andes in Chile. Associate co-editors, as Vicki mentioned, for the SEL practice is Vicki, Dr. Vicki Schwarzewski, and Dr. Lisa Fluke. And Lisa is a consultant clinical and research psychologist. And then for our associate co-editors for SEL policy, we have Jen DePauli, who's a senior researcher at the Learning Policy Institute, and Dr. Laura Hamilton, who's an associate vice president in research and measurement at the Educational Testing Center. We also have, just so you know, we have an editorial board. I'm not going to go through all of those. We have about 27 people on that editorial board who are leaders in the field across research, practice, and policy. And we also have a publications committee. What you should know, and like I said, we'll delve deeper. The first two sections, the research and the original research and perspective section, take articles that are up to 32 pages, double spaced, inclusive of references, tables, and figures. And for manuscripts in the practice and policy sections, we recommend between 8 to 20 pages. And we'll be going, there's a place on the website for the journal where you can see the details of the author guidelines as well. As I mentioned before, what's really important, again, is to say that in order to establish it's a CASEL-owned but editorially independent publication. The journal's publication committee is going to be responsible for the journal's editorial policies and operation. So things like choosing the next editor-in-chief, figuring out different policies for the journal. And they're explicitly charged with creating, implementing, and reviewing the journal's policies and practices. And the co-chairs for that is Dr. Mark Greenberg and Dr. Karen Berman. And this just gives you a list of who, I won't go through all of them, but we really tried to get a diverse and outstanding group of individuals to sit on this publications committee that is really critical for moving the journal forward. And this is the first announcement here. I feel like I need a drum roll. We have a special issue announcement. We're going to be sending out shortly a call for papers for a special issue, and this will go out in December, the current state and the future of social and emotional learning. And we're going to be inviting papers and soliciting abstracts of people who want to submit to this special issue in the next 2 months. So stay tuned and we can provide more information about that soon. So I'm going to go through over the last couple of months, we've had lots of frequently asked questions, and I'm going to go through some of those before we get to your questions, because maybe some of these are your questions as well. So so first, are you interested? One question that we did receive earlier on was, are you interested in studies conducted on SEL in Africa? And I just want to say, and I said it again, and I want to say it again and again and again, the journal is an international journal, and we encourage authors from countries all around the world to submit their work. The field of SEL is really growing internationally, and we know there's so many countries and jurisdictions taking up social emotional learning. Who is the audience for this journal? One important thing I will say is the journal is something we call open access, and I'll give you some more information about that in a minute. But that means that the journal is free to access, that anyone, researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and anyone else who's interested will be able to go to the journal website and download papers. I will also say the journal is electronic. It's not going to be it won't be a bound copy where you get a subscription and you get it mailed to your business or your home. That it will be entirely electronic. So you'll be able to go and download all the articles for free. And so what we want is to have a journal that is going to be accessible to all. And in fact, even the sections on research, the empirical research or original research and perspectives, that each author who submits not only writes a more scientific abstract, they also write an impact statement that could be easily accessible by anyone who could understand what the importance of that work is for. Does my manuscript need to align with the CASEL framework? This is one question that people have asked, like, do you need to actually have the CASEL framework to be able to publish there? And the answer is no. This journal is sponsored by CASEL, but its journal is, as I said before, it's not governed, and it's governed by an independent publications committee. So we really welcome different perspectives on social and emotional learning. Really, the point of the journal is to advance the field of social and emotional learning. And that means taking into account many different perspectives on social and emotional learning. What types, as I mentioned before, what types of manuscripts does the journal accept? And I'm going to go into more depth here. Original research, perspectives, SEL in practice that Vicki will talk about, and SEL in policy. Now, the original research section, which I said before, is manuscripts that can be submitted up to 32 pages with references double-spaced, are empirical articles, meaning research articles where there's empirical evidence that have direct applications to SEL practice and policy. Articles can include a range of methodologies, from things like RCTs or randomized controlled trials, program evaluations, meta-analyses, descriptive or longitudinal studies, ones that are about measurement or psychometric evidence, even qualitative methods. So not just quantitative, but qualitative as well, and mixed method studies as well. And that's really the articles that go under that section. The next section is a perspective section. And this is really where it could be a review of the research, maybe articles that frame, conceptualize multiple viewpoints or advance new directions on SEL research practice or policy. Maybe that articles that describe newly emerging issues or challenges in the field of social and emotional learning. It could be syntheses of existing research, scoping reviews, or systematic reviews, and as well as new perspectives on SEL research programs, practice, or policy. And Vicki, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about SEL and practice section.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Kim. So the SEL and practice section is really exciting. This is something new for a research journal. And the articles that are in the SEL practice section are written really by both researchers and practitioners, but the audience is mainly practitioners, which means that the articles must offer practical advice and strategies for how to implement or sustain SEL practice in districts, schools, and non-school settings. The way I like to think about it is what is helpful for a district or a school leader, a classroom teacher, or an SEL specialist at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. However, it's really important to keep in mind that the practical part of the article must be supported by research, whether it's specifically a research-tested intervention or whether there is research in general that supports the practice. So, for example, if you have specific methods for improving adult well-being in a school district, be sure to include what the research says about the need for adult well-being in schools, along with research that supports your methods for improving it. And similar to the research articles, these articles will also be peer-reviewed. And then whenever possible, the articles should include what we call the human element. So a story or a personal experience that helps the reader understand the topic better. And it also helps to remind us that SEL is more than the research. It's also about connecting people to their own humanity and the humanity of others. So we actually have a document that you can view that explains in greater detail the kinds of articles we're looking for that will be put in the chat box, but I'll give just a brief overview. So one kind of article that we're looking for is what we call features. These are pieces that elaborate on a specific practice or principle that's helpful in implementing SEL. So for example, how engaging families in SEL can help foster positive communication between teachers and caregivers and support SEL at home, or the steps and challenges in creating systemic implementation in SEL. You might explain what problem this practice or principle helps to address, what the effects and benefits are of this practice according to research, how education professionals can go about incorporating this practice or principle into their roles in school setting. You may consider including a step-by-step approach to make implementation feel more concrete and less a mystery to other readers. We're also interested in articles that give profiles of programs or that describe specific interventions. Now, I do want to say that the program profiles should not be to promote the program, but rather to highlight what works and why, so that practitioners can take these principles and implement them in other settings. So one way to think about these kinds of articles is to describe the research first and then describe the program that puts this research into action. And then we're also looking for articles, what we call practice briefs. So these are pieces that highlight the interplay between research and practice. So they might just start by describing the existing research, helping people understand why it's significant, and then they introduce how the research insights are translated into practice and talk about how it was implemented. So for example, a recent study found that students want teachers to be calm, clear, and kind. An article about this finding would describe the research and then maybe give examples of how an SEL focus on educator well-being can help teachers achieve this. And so for these articles, we particularly welcome articles that are co-authored by both a researcher and practitioner. And then in general, the articles for the practice section, as I mentioned before, need to be grounded in science. They need to be practical and include real life applications, but they can't be too promotional. They also need to be written for a non-academic audience. So you need to translate the academic jargon into language that your grandmother can understand, to put it very simply. And also structure the article in a way that's not too academic. In other words, a brief literature review is fine, but it must be brief and written in a way that's easily understood by a non-academic audience. And even better is to weave the research literature throughout the article. The focus is more on the translation of the research into practice. So that's a little bit about the practice section, and I'll turn it back over to you, Kim.
Thank you, Vicki. That was a great. And just to go back and emphasize, so the original research and the perspective sections are more academic. They're not meant to be for lay audiences, although there will be a part of an abstract. So what we're trying to do with this journal is really merge these two aspects, where we have ones that are for lay audiences, and then also for those who are researchers and in the academic realm. SEL and policy, as I said before, the co-associate editors for this section are Jen DePauli and Laura Hamilton, both with huge expertise in policy. And these articles follow along the same line that Vicki described, in the sense of they're really more for a lay audience. They are really about, we want articles that, again, we said 8 to 20 pages, that translate policy implications of SEL research, might explore ways in which policies influence practice or promote improvements in SEL practice and policy, and elevate examples of successful adoption of policy that advances SEL. And this section is really highlight the voices of those working to advance SEL policy and policy making in education and youth development settings. So if you think about the journal, again, that's research, social and emotional learning, research, practice, and policy. We're really trying to include all of those, so that those different audiences, policymakers, will be able to pick up this section on policy and be able to read it and share with others. Practitioners will be able to share those articles on practice, and the articles on the empirical or the original research and the perspectives will be ones that will be accessible, have important information, and have abstracts that are impact statements that will be communicated, but will also be for those who are really interested in this, advancing the science as well. So can I email? So here's some, we're going back to the frequently asked questions here. Can I email my manuscript to get feedback before formally submitting it? No, we're unable to provide informal feedback. Please, of course, if you're unsure whether your journal is actually a good fit for the journal, you could email me or the managing editor, which is Dr. Denise Briot. But we do not provide informal feedback on a manuscript. That we really want you to review the journal guidelines carefully before submitting. The one thing I would also say, when you're going through to submit, I'm hoping many of you are interested and want to know more, is that really go carefully through what the different sections include, to know that you're going to submit your article to the appropriate section of the 4 sections as well. How are the articles in the journal disseminated? What's really unique here is, I have to say, having been in academia for many years, typically you could only get a journal that through a paywall in a university setting, where you have to get it. And for this, because we're doing open access, the articles and the journal topics will be disseminated across CASEL's wide network, as well as other networks CASEL is closely aligned with, such as the George Lucas Educational Foundation, Edutopia, the Greater Good Science Center, as Vicki was saying, and other key lead organizations. So one of the things about publishing in this new journal is you really have such a wide audience to actually read the work that you have done. So now I'm going to talk a bit about what does it mean to be golden. It's supposed to be golden open access. So this is, I have to say, I became such an expert on learning about journals and the whole new publishing world of journals. And these days, it's really changed dramatically in the past several years. And they now have something called Gold Open Access models. You pay an article publishing charge, or APC, making your article immediately, permanently, and freely available for anyone to access, read, and build on. In many cases, your institution or research funder will pay the APC on your behalf. I will let you know about there is an APC cost for the articles in the journal for the original research and the perspective section. The cost is $1,700. So don't start worrying yet. Let me fill you in. And the policy and practice and policy sections are $850. But let me just tell you our model of what we're going for here. So there is support to cover open access. And there's a whole field that you go through. So the SEL Journal is committed to publishing every article that is accepted for publication of having somehow the APC covered. So yeah, we do have different lines of funding that you have to go through first. So if the authors have their own research funding, or they have their own funding from their institution that can provide the APC costs, we ask them to have that covered. If there's then you go by Elsevier, and Elsevier actually has a step-by-step process to getting funding. They have agreements with and I'll tell more about this, Research for Life, as well as they have agreements with Elsevier has agreements with countries and jurisdictions all across the world that have agreements to cover either fully or part the APC cost. One is the Research for Life, and this is one thing that Elsevier is a part of, where they provide funding to cover either fully or partially the APC costs for individuals who are in countries they've deemed as falling into their Research for Life protocol. So here it just tells you about their waivers they provide. I'm not going to go through all the details here. There'll be a link in the chat to provide you with this information. But you go to this research, actually, when you submit your article and you go to have it published, Elsevier actually brings you through to see where the authors are from. It's often the first author, or sometimes it depends on who the first author is and what the country they're from, or co-authors. It's a complicated process. I'm not going to go through all the details, but just to show you this map of where they have Research for Life. I have to put my glasses on to see the group A countries and group B countries where publishing is funded to some degree from the Research for Life from Elsevier. Elsevier provides that funding. The next one is Elsevier. So if you don't meet that criteria, you can also see, does Elsevier have open access agreements with your country or your institution? And again, there's going to be a link in the chat for you. There's a whole list of agreements that Elsevier has across many different countries, and they cover part of the fee or all of the fee as well. And so if you've gone through every other of all of these, and none of them is covered from your institution or something like that, then the journal does have a process where you can obtain funding to have the article published. And I know this is a lot of stuff, but typically, journals are published through, institutions where anyone has to pay to get access to. And because we truly believe in equity and the idea that we want these articles accessible to all, if we're going to advance social and emotional learning, research, practice, and policy, we truly believe we need to have this approach to make sure that all of it's covered. And this is just one, I was just going to show you one agreement that University of California, the whole University of California system has with Elsevier, where Elsevier actually pays the first $1,000 for the fee for that. So that's all that I have for now. I'm going to just stop my sharing, and hopefully there's some questions that you have generated, and I can't wait to hear them, and hopefully I can answer.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kim, and thank you, Vicki, for introducing us to this wonderful new resource in the field. It's super exciting, and we'll be excited to see how it unfolds. We have put links into the chat again for the links to Elsevier, so you can get more information about the journal and the APC and submitting your articles. But we'll go ahead and take some questions live now. So Kim, you mentioned that this is going to be an international journal. Do the articles need to be submitted in English, or will you be accepting and translating articles in other languages?
Unfortunately, we don't have the resources to translate articles, so we will only take articles submitted in English.
Okay, great. And that APC fee, which I understand has a lot of complexities to it, but does that have to be paid when you submit an article for consideration, or only after it's been accepted for publication?
Only after acceptance for publication, yes.
Okay.
And that's when it really goes into line where Elsevier, then we work with them to see how all the costs can be covered.
Okay, great. When you're submitting an article, is an abstract sufficient, or does the complete manuscript need to be submitted?
So that's a great question. So when you're submitting an article, you do need to submit the entire article with the abstract and follow all the guidelines depending on process. So acceptance of the abstract doesn't mean they're accepted as the article, but it's just that we deem that it could be an important contribution as well. So yes, so no, if you're just going to not submit to the special issue, you should always submit the full article.
And what are so it's going to be quarterly. What are the publication months going to be?
So right now, though, it's again another interesting fact in the whole publishing world. What happens is, as soon as your article gets accepted, it gets automatically put on the website. So it automatically is published. So as soon as it's accepted and you have your and it's all accepted, it gets right away put up on the Elsevier website. And then after there's 10 to 12 articles, they'll put it into bundle it into an issue, and it'll be like, issue 1, but you don't have to wait for the other articles all to be published before it's actually up there and available.
Oh, that's great. That's one of the many benefits of the digital world that we live in. You don't have to wait for it to come off the presses. So that's good. So this is a question that may not necessarily relate to the journal, but just in your or Vicky's opinions, what are some things that you think are important in the field that would require or are in need of more research?
I love that question. Vicky, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yes, I would say one of the needs that I'm hearing is that SEL with older students, adolescents, and even into higher education as well, because we get a lot of inquiries from higher ed. How do we help college students? So that would be one area that I would definitely encourage. I'd also encourage educator well-being. But I would add to that school leader well-being as well. So there's a great need in the field right now on how to help teachers, but school leaders are in need as well. So I would encourage that too. How about you, Kim?
I have a long list. I'll just give you a couple. I love I feel like I have the best job. I just get to think of like great research studies and get to do them. So one thing I really think is important, there's a couple. One is looking at if programs are more effective for students, SEL programs, if the teacher first has their own SEL program. So if a teacher implements an SEL program and it benefits the students, is there an added value if the teacher first has their own program that promotes their own social emotional competence well-being, and then they implement the program? So I haven't seen any studies that have that sort of that combined value. If there's a value added, that's one. I really am curious about that. I think and a second one I would say is really trying to identify the core elements of an SEL program and practices. We have many very extensive SEL programs, but do we know that if you just take out the core elements and just do those, are they as effective? So, because I think teachers are looking, I know Stephanie Jones is doing some of the work on SEL kernels, but I just really think about some research, really looking at those essential elements. And then part of my favorite, I think the two, sorry, see, I could go on a long list here. The next one would be, I'm really interested in sort of how SEL programs and practices get under the skin. I'm really interested in how they perhaps change stress physiology or through cortisol, how they have benefits to health. We know that they, improve academics and things like that, but do they actually have, is there research, in like sort of interdisciplinary research with people who in health psychology to see how these programs actually influence health? And then I think the fourth one is really this idea of systemic SEL. We have a lot of work talking about this importance of systemic SEL and transformative SEL, and really doing research to really show, like, if you have elements in the system, are they more effective? And what are those essential elements that you need to have to really change the system and to have that systemic approach?
Can I add one more?
Yes,
to your list, because you're right, Kim, as you start to think about this, it's there's so many topics that are interesting. Can I add cultural responsive SEL as well? So particularly we're looking for articles that are international. And when I talk to, for example, colleagues in India, and I share with them some SEL practices, they tell me, well, that wouldn't necessarily work in our country or within our culture as well. And so I'm really curious about adaptations of kind of standard SEL curriculum that comes out of the United States per se, and how different cultures adapt it to meet their needs.
I love that. That's so great. That's such an important point. Okay, I have one more. Well, really, I have 10 more, but I'll give you one more is really this idea of how do we get practitioners and researchers to talk together so that I'm always looking to practitioners tell me what they think needs to be researched, because out in practice, so we always talk about research practice partnerships and this idea of researchers coming in and they're informing practice, but I really feel that we need to have, and this is what I hope the journal will do, is to have more dialogue with practitioners coming in and saying, these are things we're noticing. These are the kind of questions we have for research. Can someone go out and research them? So I'm hoping that that's the kind of, that we'll have that dialogue and that will really spark the field.
Yeah, well, those were all fascinating topics, and I can't wait to see them show up in the journal one day. That was great. Thank you both for sharing that. Another question about the articles themselves. Will you be accepting literature review articles for the practice section?
In general, no. We really want practical examples of how the research is being used in schools or out of school areas as well. So, so the article can include small literature reviews to support the practice that's being described, but in general, no, we don't accept literature reviews for the practice section.
For the perspective section, which is under the first two sections of articles up to 32 pages, they can be like a scoping review or a literature review that's really trying to identify, here are some things that we know from the literature, here's where we need to go, here's some questions that are emerging. I'll just give one example of a scoping review that actually it wasn't published in this journal because it didn't exist yet, but one of my master's students actually did a scoping review of human animal interactions in SEL and did a whole scoping review of what is the evidence. I mean, if anybody has pets, what is the evidence or brings animals of how human animal interactions in schools actually promote social and emotional learning.
Oh, that's fascinating. There's so much to research and learn about. Like you said, Kim, my wheels are turning too.
Yes.
So we do have a couple questions just about that special issue. If you can give any more information just about what the topic's going to be, what the time frame is.
Yeah, so the current and future state of SEL, it's really going to be broad in terms of looking at articles that really address some of the current issues in social and emotional learning, and as well as looking to the future. So we don't really have specific topics that we're saying you have to have it on this, but we're really looking for ones more broadly. And I don't know, Vicki, you just wrote your ideas for that section. Maybe you could talk a bit about for the practice section, what you're looking for.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So similar to what we're looking for what's new and what are new things that people are trying in schools and in districts as well that are working. So maybe it's culturally responsive SEL, maybe it's systemic implementation. What's a procedure that has worked, that sort of thing. So, but really we're very open because that's the whole idea, is that it's what's the future of SEL, what's coming, what's new, what's exciting.
Exactly. And I would say, and as far as the timeline, the idea is the call will go out in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be looking for abstracts sometime in February, and then article submissions a few months after that. So stay tuned. We'll certainly share that a call as soon as it's ready. It has to go through some journal machinations of getting that all set up for the journal on their Elsevier website and things like that. But we will be sharing it shortly. It'll be very exciting. And really, we want it to be kind of this this idea of this new ideas and the future frontier of social and emotional learning.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And it's just great that you'll get all those abstracts and can kind of just build the concept from everybody's ideas. So that's a great collaborative way.
It'll
to
be
do it.
good. And Emily, just thinking about that, certainly anyone who's signed up for this webinar, we should send that call for the special issues through, we'll send it through that link. I'm sure there's a way to do that.
Yeah, we'll for sure alert everybody on this webinar in particular, as well as the broader Castle
Yes.
community. But yeah, these folks for sure will want to know that. So we'll keep them in the loop.
Great.
Well, I think that we have come to the end of our questions. If anybody's got a last one, feel free to pop it in the Q&A and we'll get it to Vicki and Kim now. But if not, I do want to thank Vicki and Kim for joining us today and for all of your hard work with this journal and the rest of the editorial committee and board. It's an exciting new development in the field. And I know we're going to see lots of great research and ideas coming out of it. So thanks for being here.